Hello, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's July 2nd, and today we are going to take a look at the Astrology of July. So it's always at the beginning of the month that I try to do a live cast featuring the astrology of the month ahead. So also at the beginning of every month, I also provide for my readers and the general public a sun sign horoscope column. So you can, at the beginning of the month, you can always read about your sun, moon, or rising sign, or you can tune in and hear something of the general transits for the month ahead. So we're always trying to provide people with a variety of different ways of thinking about everything to come in the month ahead. And you can do so from a personal standpoint with a sun sign horoscope, and you can do so in a more general sense with this reading. So the reason to provide both is pretty simple. You are always looking at events in astrology through the lens of your birth chart. And so having some sense of the personal way in which the planets may be affecting you can be gained by having a general month ahead kind of reading like this one today, where we're going to be saying, okay, here's what's happening on what day of the month. And if you know something about your chart, if you have some working knowledge of your chart already, then it becomes very easy to just sort of emplace those transits into your birth chart, or imagine what houses they're taking place in. So for a lot of people, this kind of transit is really handy. On the other hand, some people don't know their birth charts very well. And so if you don't know your birth chart very well, or you're not sort of seasoned in astrology, or even, have some beginning introductory knowledge of astrology, then a sun sign horoscope column can be very nice, because the basic idea in a sun sign horoscope column is that you're reading something of a more generalized view of what the month ahead is like for you, based on whether you're a Taurus sun or if you're a Gemini sun or something like that. I'm planning on doing a video, hopefully sometime soon, talking about sort of the history of sun sign horoscopes, how they work, because every time that I put them out, I get a lot of questions about them. How is it that a sun sign horoscope column could work at all, and stuff like that? So more to say. I've said some things in the past about that, but we will be looking at that in an upcoming video, probably in the next month or so. What I'll say, generally speaking, is that if you don't know anything about your birth chart, be sure to check out the sun sign horoscopes. If you were born at nighttime, read for the moon sign. If you were born at daytime, during the daytime, read for the sun sign. You can always read for your rising sign as well. And it doesn't hurt to read all three. Sometimes one of the three will tend to stand out the most in terms of the specifics of the forecast and the events that are taking place in your life. And it's not always totally consistent. So that has to do with a wide variety of factors, but the sun sign columns are basically built for you to have a pretty accurate sense of what's going on in your life, based on a chart that's centered around putting the sun, moon, or rising in the first whole sign house, and then reading all of the transits through a sun, moon, or rising centered chart for the month ahead. And it's a great thing to do also for people who don't have any birth information whatsoever, because a lot of people out there don't. Some people immediately say, does this kind of make it like, is there something that's valid other than a birth chart? And the answer is, of course, yes. Throughout the history of astrology, there's always been many different valid ways of utilizing astrological techniques to gain insight or information about ourselves. And you also have to remember that ancient astrologers used the time of conception, and some used the time of birth. So there hasn't even always been full agreement about what the precise time of the moment of a birth chart should be. So anyway, all of that is just background information. Check out those horoscope columns that are on my homepage at Facebook or nightlightastrology.com to read for the month of July. Talking about now the transits of the month. there are always some transits that I miss, or that some people will say, why didn't you look at this one, or why didn't you look at that one? For me, it's based on, the way that I practice as a more Hellenistic style astrologer, and it's also based on the fact that I don't, for example, spend a lot of time with asteroids or with newly discovered planets. That's just not like my focus. So if you're like, why isn't he talking about Chiron or something like that? It's nothing to do with like not believing in the importance of other kinds of objects or planets. Just I have to narrow the focus in some ways, and every astrologer does that a little bit differently. So this month ahead, let's dive in. The month is going to get started on July 5th. When Mercury in Leo opposes Mars retrograde in Aquarius. And both planets will be simultaneously conjunct the nodes of the moon. So this is happening in literally the next 3-4 days. You can already see this transit basically perfecting in the sky right now. It's not far off at all. Right now, Mercury is at about 5 degrees, and Mars retrograde is just moving into the 8th degree. So the two are coming together by opposition. The nodes are conjoined. What do you get when you cross, Mercury and Mars? Well, you get the god of information, technology, speech, communication, opposing the god of war. So the obvious, the obvious interpretation of this transit has to do with intense confrontational debates or argumentation or confrontation or hostility in communication. So you want to be really careful about basically that fight over spilled milk in the kitchen that can turn into a total antagonizing of one another and a big blowout. Over the course of this week, you want to be very careful of speech that is meant to harm or hurt, bullying speech, anything that has that Mars-like aggressive quality in speech, especially through an opposition, could be overly severe or harsh right now, or rigid. And so being dogmatic, being zealous, being extreme in the way that we talk to one another, be very careful about those super combative dynamics in social media. You get the idea. Just be careful of the god of war and the god of speech and communication getting together. However, you also have things like cyber attacks, identity theft, because you have communication and technology, and both Mercury and Mars originally associated with thieves and cyberbullying, cyber warfare. You get, all of those kinds of more difficult themes. And it's amplified, of course. There's a kind of potent karmic feeling about it with the nodes of the moon conjoined. The simplest thing to say without getting too heady about it is that the nodes of the moon conjoined with Mercury and Mars at this time simply amplify the sort of fatedness of these encounters. It becomes stronger. There's more momentum and force coming, behind this one. So you also have to be very careful about proud, boastful, arrogant, egotistical ways of presenting information, because that's a possibility for this one. You also can look for some positive themes, which may be courage, the desire to say or speak your mind in a way that's courageous or bold, or to confront someone or something that needs to be confronted, to do so in a balanced but brave way. That's a part of this transit. To use communication or technology as a medium for advocating for something, or being a guardian or a protector. Those are all Mars themes as well. You have the theme also of a critical analysis. And so the themes of analyzing, cutting, dissecting, taking apart so that you understand how something works could be very strong right now, but it could also lead to being judgmental, or it could lead to a kind of tendency to deconstruct something or others in order to feel good about ourselves. So you always want to be kind of mindful of that tendency with Mercury and Mars opposite. So those are some of the things that can come up with Mercury and Mars that perfects through July 5th. And July 5th, however, at the same time, right around the same time, the Sun in Cancer will be trining Jupiter in Scorpio. And that's happening just prior to Jupiter turning direct after a long period of retrogradation on July 11th. So the 5th through the 11th, even though there's this intensifying theme of communication and possible hostility, confrontation and speech, things like that, it wouldn't surprise me, by the way, to see, remember just recently, I live in Maryland, just recently we had an attack on the press. We had a newspaper office where there was a shooting, deadly shooting. And the theme of course, that happens as Mercury and Mars are coming into orb of one another, you could say. So in the opposition. And so this also the theme of free speech and oppressing those who desire to speak their mind, trying to, again, bully or quarantine what can or should or shouldn't be said. You know, we have some issues around that. So, but the beautiful thing is that from the 5th through the 11th, there's also this wave of energy coming in that's very productive and pretty positive. The Sun is, of course, related to light and clarity and growth. And in Cancer, it's a very nurturing, gentle Sun. And so you see those energies kind of coming through in a trine with Jupiter as Jupiter turns direct. And whenever any planet turns direct, it's as though they're kind of getting its mojo back. The planet Jupiter, especially when it goes retrograde, is sometimes about a period of doubt where there was confidence, maybe overconfidence about something. There's been a period of having to kind of pull things back in and reconsider, reflect. Jupiter retrograde is also delays in the process of growth or having to wait, kind of expectant waiting for some big thing. So for example, you may be in the process of a creative project and it's moving forward. And then there's a lengthy waiting, revising, editing, waiting for approvals or something like that while Jupiter's retrograde. Jupiter turns direct and you start hearing back, okay, things look good. Here's the final revisions, . So the Jupiter turning direct period with the Sun trining it has this feeling of light and clarity and growth and good fortune and kind of feeling the wind at your back. So a really positive period between the 5th and the 11th. Of course, not everything that grows is necessarily good, and Jupiter is in a Mars-ruled sign, Scorpio. So this growth may still require some level of purgation, cleansing, healing, or change. That's kind of part of Jupiter and Scorpio, you might say, in general. But the Sun in Cancer gives a feeling of warmth and optimism, and there's a lightness with the Sun in Cancer right now that's really nice. So, but just think of a positive change of momentum happening, maybe also related to topics like home and family with the Sun in Cancer. Some transformative energies that are kind of picking up again and starting to push you forward, being the wind in your sails. So that's between the 5th and the 11th. The Sun trines Jupiter, and then Jupiter turns direct. On the 9th, Mercury, after moving out of the opposition to Mars, picks up a square to Jupiter and Scorpio on the 9th. So that's really nice because even though we have this kind of really intense Mercury-Mars energy at the beginning of the month, then very quickly you have Mercury turning into a nice square with Jupiter. And so sometimes Jupiter and Mercury, because they're planetary opposites, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, Mercury rules Gemini, Jupiter rules Pisces, Mercury rules Virgo. So the opposite signs to one another ruled by Jupiter and Mercury represent an inherent planetary tension between Jupiter and Mercury. For example, many of us in the modern world, we place Mercury first. We say, give me the information, give me the facts, give me the, and then, and then I'll decide whether or not I trust, or I'll decide whether or not I'm going to have faith in something. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that knowledge is actually directly correlated with faith, that it grows out of faith. That if you have faith in this case, in the Bhagavad Gita, we're talking about faith in the divine. Krishna says, if you have faith in me, I'll give you the knowledge that naturally provides you with the ability to develop your spiritual life. So when Mercury is in Leo and it's in what we call a superior or overcoming square to Jupiter in Scorpio, there's sometimes the temptation or desire to try and override faith through mental or intellectual knowledge, or through the power of one's charismatic, more mental, charismatic personality. So you're thinking of Mercury and Leo saying, I know this. I'm kind of the measure of all things, or I'm the truth, or I'm the authority. My opinions, my thoughts are the final word. And with Jupiter, overcoming Jupiter, it can thus develop almost like the qualities of a cult leader or something, a charismatic personality, but one that's really leading from the position of a more mentally domineering perspective. So you have to be careful of that, because even in ancient astrology, a similar value was placed on Jupiter. Jupiter was, it's not that really that one planet was ever better than another, but Jupiter, just like Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, oftentimes what Mercury struggles with is being subservient to faith. Mercury's natural tendency is to want to remain in control through mental analysis, and same way that our mental, the sort of mental hemisphere of the brain always wants to sort of dictate and take control over the more creative hemisphere of the brain. A very similar dynamic between Mercury and Jupiter, and the point is just that during this Mercury-Jupiter dynamic, it can be very inspiring of faith and confidence, and there can be a lot of learning and growth and very powerful communication dynamics around this time. You just have to be really careful that you're not trying to overstate, that you're not exaggerating, that you're not boasting, or that you're not trying to basically persuade other people in a rhetorical manner, in a manipulative, intellectual manner, as opposed to coming to people from the heart, which is really important and easy to get that a little turned around in a not so great way when Mercury is overcoming Jupiter. So hopefully that point makes enough sense. Just remember with around July 9th, with Mercury square Jupiter, that spiritual knowledge often comes from a commitment that the heart makes without a really thorough set of rational reasons for doing so. Believing that you are a divine being is something that most people are led to in a sense by faith, and a reason can accompany it, but faith is in some ways, for real knowledge to grow, faith has to come first in a lot of ways. So that's an important lesson of that transit, you might say. All right. So anyway, July 12th, we have a major solar eclipse. This one is just a doozy, because this solar eclipse on July 12th is happening around the 20th degree of Cancer in pretty much exact opposition with Pluto. So this July 12th eclipse is a solar eclipse. Even though the nodes of the moon are still going to be in Leo and Aquarius, they are, by November, they'll be changing signs into Cancer and Capricorn. And so this eclipse in many ways is foreshadowing a long period of eclipses to come in Cancer and Capricorn. With Pluto involved, you have themes of depth, intensity, transformation, the themes of the underworld, of death and rebirth, and so forth, coming through this eclipse. So while this eclipse a solar eclipse in Cancer might normally look like a sort of powerful new beginning in, say, the Cancerian whole sign house of your chart. It's going to be amplified and intensified by the opposition to Pluto. Oftentimes eclipses are, solar eclipses especially, which are always happen on new moons, are planting the seeds for some new era or some new something new in our life. I see Rebecca Gordon is here. It's my very first astrology teacher. And I remember Rebecca, actually, one of the first things that I've always carried with me that she taught me, she said eclipses are like doors that are opening. And I don't know if Rebecca herself may have heard that from one of her teachers, but solar eclipses are like doors that are opening. And lunar eclipses, which we'll talk about another lunar eclipse a little bit, lunar eclipses in some ways are like windows closing. And I'll never forget her teaching me that. And I've always used that since. But that's a great way of thinking about solar eclipses. Solar eclipses open doors. And so you normally would think a solar eclipse in Cancer, that sounds pretty nice, like a kind of a Cancerian, a new beginning in the Cancerian area might indicate lunar things and new beginnings around lunar things, whether that's home and family, your living situation, your emotional bonds with other people, your larger family tribal groups that you belong to, just kind of that domestic sphere of life, something new opening up in that area. Of course, it's very unique to each of our birth charts. You should also look at the whole sign house of Cancer in your chart, or the 20th degree of Cancer in your chart, if you know where that is. But this one, because it involves an opposition to Pluto, is so intense. And eclipses, while they're doors that are opening, sometimes the seeds that are planted during a new moon solar eclipse aren't really realized. The fruits aren't really realized in our life for many months to come. So you can think of eclipses as, because they come in sets, because there's many of them in the same signs over a long period of time, you also have a process of transformation. So each time, sometimes the way I think about it is like, if I go into a massage therapist and let's say I have a problem with my shoulder, she doesn't just hammer on the shoulder, or he doesn't just hammer on the shoulder. I have a woman that I see regularly here. That's why I said that. When I go in, she's not just going to work on my shoulder the whole time and focus on it, right? She'll start by warming up the entire body and then working on related pieces of tissue sort of around that area. And then she'll come back and focus on it. And then she'll kind of go around, work around different parts of the body, and then come back and focus on it. The recurring eclipses in the same signs to me have always been sort of similar to that process. The eclipses come up in two basic sets per year. When the sun is traveling, for example, in these upcoming eclipses through Cancer in the summer, or Capricorn during the winter, that's when you'll start seeing the eclipses coming through those times. Then it's like you're coming back and there's some knots being sort of worked out in that area of your chart. You could think about it like that. Anyway, there's probably problems with that analogy too, you could find, I'm sure, but that's the basic gist of it, is that they're coming in waves like that. And so you don't always realize the effects of an eclipse right on the day of the eclipse. So sometimes people will say, well, on July 12th, like nothing, stupendous, it's nothing crazy happened. And so I always say to people, just remember that there's like a window of change. For example, last summer, solar eclipse in Leo, the big one, the total solar eclipse. I had a client of mine who had that right on her descendant, which is a critical degree in your house of, love and relationships, for example, 7th house. So she was saying, I said, you might meet someone this year. She was single. And she said, I don't know about that, and it's almost, coming on a year later. And she's indeed, met someone. They're very serious. They've moved in together, and thinking very seriously about getting married. So, just a perfect example of this, that eclipse happened in August. She didn't meet this guy until I think it was November, right? So the promise of that eclipse took a while to play out. And that's very, very common for eclipses, because remember, it's not just one eclipse, it's usually cycles of eclipses in the same signs. The relationship, of course, took some big turning points, including moving in together as the next series of eclipses came through her seventh house in Leo, a lunar eclipse in Leo in, I think it was late January or early February of this year. So you can think about the eclipses like that as well. But this one is a big transformational solar eclipse. The theme of death and rebirth is very powerful. Traditional issues around the masculine and the feminine, the patriarchy, the matriarchy, the family, and the need for tender warmth and cohesion within groups versus the more structures and the structures and rules and laws of the groups. For example, you think of the family and you think of Cancer, and you think of everyone, enjoying laughter and lemonade, such a summer Cancerian thing, like on the porch or something. Just super classic image. Capricorn, you think of as the mortgage, as the bills, as the 9 to 5 that pays the mortgage and the bills, that creates in some ways the structural foundation for that pastime on the porch with lemonade. So that's just another simple kind of image, a series of images to consider. But those dynamics, those kinds of tensions in our lives and our relationships may be especially highlighted during this eclipse. Now, the other thing you can think about is with new moon solar eclipse, with any new moon solar eclipse, but especially one that involves Pluto, you also think about new beginnings that come through a change of circumstances that are intense, deep, powerful, cathartic, healing, purgative, but they confront you on a soul level with something in your unconscious. So this one may drag things up from the depths of the unconscious, and they may, there may be kind of things that have to come out. And so the theme of like depth and confrontation with the unconscious around this new beginning is very powerful. So I wanted to spend a little extra time on the eclipse because it's such a big one. Now, on July 18th, Mars will conjoin the south node of the moon in Aquarius, and we've already had that. So this will be the second time that Mars is conjoining the south node of the moon. You have to remember that ancient astrologers did not look at the nodes of the moon in the same way that modern evolutionary astrologers do. So there is some difference in the way you'll hear me talk about that compared to an evolutionary astrologer. The basic idea in ancient astrology is that the south node of the moon is related with Saturn, with decrease, with loss, with consolidation, or with diminishment in the material world, in fortune. A diminishment in fortune can look a lot of different ways. It can look and appear in a lot of different ways, and it's not wholly good or wholly bad. In the ancient one manuscript from medieval astrology, there's a famous statement you'll hear is that the south node decreases both the good and the bad. So it's related with just general unanimous decrease, and that's why the planet Saturn is often associated with the south node of the moon. In the Indian tradition, the south node of the moon is the more auspicious of the two nodes because through loss in the material world, one is more inclined toward renunciation. Renunciation being the hopefully, we're talking about a healthy level of renunciation. It's never, I've seen lots of people with the south node. In fact, when we had Mars and the south node together last, we had that string of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, and there were some other people from other parts of the world too who took their own lives. So sometimes Mars in the south node can be a very extreme form of renunciation, of saying goodbye to something, of separating from something, of eliminating something, of purging or releasing something. And sometimes it's too violent, too impulsive, too reactionary, or tragically so. But at least, for those of us who are still around, that's how we feel about it. So generally speaking, though, the south node was considered more auspicious because where there is loss materially, there is often a natural sense in which the soul starts to remember itself as an eternal being who is not ultimately connected to material things. So, for example, if you've ever gotten out of a relationship, you feel like you've lost everything. You feel like you lost your best friend. You feel like you lost, right? But that attachment is gone. suddenly there comes we always say things like, I remember who I am now. I can't believe I forgot who I am. I got lost in the relationship, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a little reflection in that tendency to say something like that of what we're talking about here with the south node of the moon and renunciation. When you lose something, there's a natural and inherent way in which you readily feel you feel ready to give up more things. You say, I'm not going to get into another relationship so quickly. I'm not going to go and look for something to fill me up so quickly because I don't need that kind of thing. Now, how long that lasts? Not so long. We are, after all, people who most of us are not ready to be renunciates living in a cave somewhere. But there is spiritual progress that we're here to make in life that does have to do with letting go of things in the material world, living simpler lives. My dad used to have a bumper sticker on the back of his car that said, "Live simply so that others may simply live." You couldn't get more south node of the moon, in a sense, than that. Of course, my father's also an Aquarius sun, so it kind of makes sense that was his sentiment. Saturn is a planet associated with the south node of the moon that also has a lot to do with simplicity. Saturn always gets such a bad rep, but one of the things that that you'll see in a monastic setting is great simplicity. And some people feel like, oh, that's austere, that's heavy, that da da da. But it's amazing how full of life and happiness and sweetness and joy an apparently austere external environment can be. So that, you have the inner life being overflowing with abundance, basically, even though in order to get there on some levels, the monk or the nun in any tradition may have to greatly simplify their setting. And that's Saturn, and that's also the south node of the moon. So the south node of the moon you can think of as every time that the moon crosses the path of the sun going downward toward the south, you have the idea of a decrease in fortune. So the descending node, so it's associated with decrease. But where there is decrease, there is a possibility for renunciation. And where there's the possibility for healthy renunciation, we'll call it, there is the opportunity for greater inner joy and clarity. We get a little bit closer to that eternal self that we are. So those are some things to think about with moon and south node getting together, or Mars conjoining the south node of the moon around July 18th. But with Mars, you also think about the forcefulness, the violence, the extreme, the macho. There's nothing, if we're being macho about reducing or eliminating things, if there is a lot of goal orientation and we're seeking nothing but, building up our own egos because of how renounced we are, or we're seeking some level of accomplishment or thrill or excitement by, trying to eliminate things or people from our life. Sometimes there's a bravado that I see in New Age world where it says it's time to cut that cord. Cut that cord, baby. Let's get rid of that. Get rid of that nasty stuff, and like that. And something that I was taught in the ayahuasca tradition that I participated in for a long time was that the way that you take out the trash transforms your relationship to trash. And it's very, very important. So there may be something that you have to cut out during this Mars South Node event. But remember that even if something isn't good for you or it isn't healthy, we have to remember that in this realm of duality, if we take a position of being anti-trash, in a weird way, it ends up perpetuating a cycle where we'll keep inviting it back into our lives. So it's about compassionate removal of things that are no longer necessary. How do we act valiantly? We may have to cut a cord. Mars is cutting. We may have to bravely confront something. We may have to address something in a more head-on way. But discretion is the better part of valor, as the saying goes. And there is a way of eliminating something from our lives that is compassionate, that's not puffed up, that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't look for, accolades or recognition for how spiritually renounced it is or whatever. So basic idea with this one is elimination without machismo. Even spiritual machismo is a thing. Also, the bravery needed to confront something. Now, this is all going to be stepping up quite a bit by the time we get to July 27th, where there's a lunar eclipse involving Mars and the South Node. So we'll get to that in a minute. But that kind of gives you a preview of what's to come. Mars and the South Node have been very close together. What is another perfect example of this in the media? Get rid of those immigrants. You get them out of my country. Eliminate them. Right? So there's that. I want to forcefully eliminate or remove something from my picture. And that is a perfect instance of Mars and the South Node of the Moon together. So it's not just, it can be enlightened. There can be enlightened removal of things, or there can be that sort of prejudicial and overly aggressive, extreme kinds of statements about getting rid of. And so we want to be very careful of that in general. Some people would say, how is it possible that Mars in Aquarius, by the way, could possibly, Mars in Aquarius, how is that related to like removing children from the country? Isn't Aquarius just like such a noble, peaceful, humanitarian sign? And this is actually a great misconception about the sign of Aquarius that I am really passionate about in general, I try to educate people about the classical meanings of signs and planets and some of the differences between the classical meanings between signs and planets, so that we can become clearer on why it is that you could see someone like I always use the example of Sarah Palin, who has, a bunch of Aquarian planets in her chart. Why, not necessarily someone that we would think of as a great humanitarian. It's because the sign of Aquarius, the water pourer, the image of the water pourer, for example, the image of the water pourer is an image of a servant of the gods. This is not so much. Sometimes people mistakenly think that the water pourer is an image of someone who is, pouring like water, like in a humanitarian spirit, like down to the people. And doing some research on this in the past years, what I learned is that the Aquarian image was thought of more as a servant to the gods in the heavens. So this is someone who, the image of the water pourer is more like the one who's bringing the gods their water, or bringing the gods their basically you could think of it like a servant to the gods on Olympus. And this conception of Aquarius has been around for a long time. And so one of the best ways to think about Aquarius is in terms of the rulership of Saturn and the knowledge that Saturn was an outsider. Saturn was a liminal, distant, dim planet that is related to both the feeling of being lofty and distant and detached and better than other people. So, for example, the feeling of a group of people thinking, I'm better than those damn immigrants, get them out of my country. I'm better than them. They're foreign, they're distant. So they project Saturn onto the group of people as the outsider, and the marginalized, they marginalize them, alienate them. But they're actually embodying Saturn at the same time, because Saturn is also, I'm the servant of the gods. I'm the chosen one. I have a special relationship that distances me from the norm of people who are on the outside. So that it's not, Saturn has a lot to do with walls, but it also has to do with the relationship between who's on which side of the wall. And that's something one of my students was telling me, that Austin Koppak said something about Capricorn being on one side of the wall and Aquarius being on the other, or something I thought was pretty cool. But at any rate, the Aquarian can just as easily be a dogmatic sense of being elite and removed from the rest of the world. I am superior to the outsiders. That's an Aquarian perspective that's reflected by what Saturn can be like. On the other hand, the groups of people who are marginalized, who are on the outside, who are lonely, who are hurt, who are desolate, who are on the fringe. That's also Saturn in Aquarius. So frequently we get Aquarius wrong by thinking of, even thinking of the age of Aquarius, which is also a relatively modern concept, that there is such a thing as an age of Aquarius. But the point is that with Aquarius, you can see the theme of people in Mars and Aquarius persecuting outsiders from a position of lofty, high nobility, like I'm so much better, or you can see the theme of advocating, protecting, defending Mars, the outsider. So those themes are going to be really strong over the summer, and particularly with this at this time around July 18th, when Mars gets together with the south node of the moon. July 27th, too, with the eclipse, which I'll get to in a second. Now, on July 24th, there's a Venus-Neptune opposition. This is a fun little interlude. Be careful of any kinds of extremes with regard to intoxication or substances, because Venus-Neptune it's easy to drink 6 cups of coffee, not realize it, and then find yourself running around naked in your office later that day. Or you might drink too much, you might buy too much. Very easy to get caught up in that wave of inspired sort of romantic revelry and just go get lost. So that's the easy thing to say right away. Be careful around July 24th of this sort of Venus-Neptune influence that can put us in a fog or a sort of delusional state. On the other hand, Venus opposite Neptune can be great for sort of being visited by the muse, receiving a creative download, being in an inspired sort of romantic state with a lover, and that can be truly magical, where you can connect and deepen your intimacy in really great ways. There can also be some Venus opposite Neptune illusion and disillusionment in relationships, coming to see the real you, coming to see the real me. This theme of enchantment and disenchantment, illusion and disillusionment, seeing things clearly, finding a love that's based, an intimacy, a love, a beauty that's based on the real, as opposed to some delusional fantasy. On the other hand, sometimes we need a break from reality. We need a creative interlude. We need a romantic, staycation, as they call them. You need to lock yourself into your house for the weekend and just, basically, watch a lot of movies, eat some food that you probably shouldn't. It's like sometimes we all need to just press reset and escape a little bit, and that happens, and it's not the worst thing in the world. But let this speak to you, because wherever we tend to go to extremes like that, it's usually also a sign that we're not giving ourselves enough of what we long for in our everyday lives. So why do you need a 3-day binge fest, during a Venus-Neptune opposition? It might be fun, it might be pretty harmless, but why do you need it? Oh, well, it's because I don't prioritize beauty, love, romance, intimacy, touch. I don't prioritize those things 90% of the time because I stay so busy. And then I fly to this extreme, and then I come out of it and I feel totally unprepared to go back into my regular routine. And that can create problems over time, that those innocent little departures into debauchery that we all have, over time, they can start to create a growing chasm in our lives between what we long for and what we actually have. And when we don't address it, but just keep putting, escapist band-aids on it, that there can grow, something can start to fester in there. Some illusions can start to spiral out of control. So we have to be very careful of what we allow during Venus opposite Neptune in the name of escape, So those are some things, positive and negative, to look for around the Venus opposite Neptune transit. Finally, on July 27th, you'll have a lunar eclipse in Aquarius with Mars in the south node. Now, I highly expect, I'm going to say this as clearly as possible, but I highly anticipate that these eclipses we're going to see in the news in July, because you've got one opposite Pluto, you've got another one, a lunar eclipse conjoined with Mars. Like, my God, those are some intense eclipses. The August eclipse, relative to the other two, is not so bad, but the eclipse of July 27th, you're going to see it in the news. I hate to say it, but you're going to see something that's just quintessentially, the Aquarian and the lunar and the Mars and the South Node all together. Whether that's more issues around violence, repression, or violence, repression, or activism surrounding women in the media, or whether you see themes of children and families being separated, or whether you see more on the protest side of the story, or whether you see more Donald Trump's chart. This is falling in his 7th house, so that's the house of love and relationships. So whether you see more about more drama coming up for Trump in regard to his treatment of women or relationships in his past, or his wife, or Melania, or whatever, but we're going to see some stuff in the news. Wouldn't be surprising under either of these eclipses. Just like we saw at this last full moon energy that came through, and then the shootings here in Maryland. I mean, this stuff is just it's an epidemic right now. So you can set your watch astrologically to it in a lot of ways, unfortunately. But you'll probably see some more heavy headlines with the Mars South Node Moon combination on the lunar eclipse on July 27th. But you want to watch for big changes happening that have to do with releasing. This one can be hard on health. You think of Aquarius, you think sometimes of the circulatory system in general. So stuff like that can be you may see sort of themes of that going on. But violence towards women, issues of women's health, reproductivity, families and children, environmental things, perhaps groups of people, and attacks made directly toward groups of people, one group trying to marginalize another. I mean, that's all the mundane stuff that you'll probably see with this eclipse. Not that it's necessarily anything new, but it is a pretty intense one. And then personally, you want to look at the Aquarian chart in your house. Specifically, I believe this is around 4 to 6 degree range, somewhere around there. So you want to look at either those degrees in your chart if you know where they are, or you want to look at the whole sign house of Aquarius, which is what I would always recommend doing, to see where in your chart something's going to happen. This eclipse, remember just not to be overly reactive, impulsive. Be careful of your temper. Be careful of rash decisions. Remember that taking an anti-stance tends to perpetuate things. So there's a way of fighting for something without being anti. And it's a mood, it's a tone that we carry. So we have compassionate resistance as a theme around this eclipse. But overall, I think this eclipse can bring us some good healing if we're willing to face and confront things that need to go, or that need to be removed or eliminated. And if we can show a healthy level of detachment, then I think we stand to grow quite a bit and find a deeper level of happiness. But it's also natural under this eclipse to visit places where we feel alienated, or we feel marginalized, or we feel like something is being taken away from us that we don't necessarily want to give up, or something like that. And that might not be easy, but this eclipse, again, at the end of the day, as a part of the Mars retrograde, there's destiny in the air with this one. These eclipses have destiny sort of written all over them. Not all eclipses are like that. It's not easy to differentiate which one is which, but anytime there's eclipses, you have the luminaries being eclipsed. And that means that where there is light, there is consciousness. Where there is consciousness, there is free will. Where there isn't consciousness, usually we tend to be moved along by forces that we're not in relation with. And so when the lights get eclipsed, it's usually it's a time where some level of the unconscious powers in just the forces of nature and within us and within our karmic trajectory are taking over. There can, of course, the eclipses can indicate the illumination and greater awakening of consciousness, but often through an encounter with the shadow, because the shadow is literally coming across the surface of the light. So you always have to remember that circumstances, fated circumstances that are critical to our spiritual development or our karmic trajectory are sort of promised around eclipses. We have to look at them as equal opportunity events. No matter what happens, no matter how they manifest, the easiest way to experience an eclipse as something for the benefit of your soul is to find a deep level of acceptance and trust and faith that there is not one moment that doesn't pass in our lives that is not an opportunity for us to say yes at a deeper level to the divinity in all things, and even as profoundly difficult as that can be sometimes. And that should not engender within us a spirit of passivity, weakness, etc., but rather should encourage us that all of the all of the things that we're involved with in our life, that we place so much attention and we give so much of our life to, they are in one sense not the point of being here. We can very easily get lost in them, and yet with an awakened consciousness and intelligence, we can live our destiny path without getting lost in it. So that's my thoughts for today. I'm going to take a look at any questions that people have. That takes us through the month of July. Let's see, going up all the way. So good to see all of you guys. Oh, July 13th is your birthday. Well, that's a big one for you. You're going to have, it's your solar return should be pretty powerful this year. It's a chart for the year ahead. Love the idea of renunciation. Perfect. Comes from Christina. Sun at 5 degrees Aquarius here. Oh, well, then it's a very big one for you, Olga. Yeah, when it's on your sun like that, you're thinking of major changes of circumstance that can change your whole sense of purpose and life direction with it being right on the sun like that. Some really destined events. Possibly sometimes our relationship with our father comes up with it on the sun in that kind of way too, or with men or leaders, or finding our own authority or something like that. The sun. Venus at 7 Aquarius, 10th house. Yeah, so that one would probably activate your career, the topic of women, relationships, diplomacy, beauty, the arts, and professional things at once. Maybe a little bit challenging around those things, or Mars may sort of really intensify some of those themes, but that's where that one would probably show up. Moved along by forces we're not in relationship with is a beautiful and neutral way to describe it. Is this a good week to travel and relax? Well, I feel like in my world, it's always a good week to travel and relax. But yeah, so I don't think that there's ever one unanimous time. Like, I would be hesitant to, I'd be a little careful around traveling under eclipses in general. I'm just kind of superstitious about that, though. And I'm a little superstitious about, booking tickets like on the day Mercury is stationing to turn retrograde or something. But otherwise, I don't think there's not just one. It really depends on your chart and what's going on in your chart as to how, I would say generally how travel experiences will go. Ascendant at 6 degrees Aquarius. Okay, yeah. So it's another. It's the birth line in your chart. So the start of something new, perhaps for you. Yeah, or you want to be careful of health things. Really, make sure you're taking care of your health there. Yeah, you will be able to rehear this. I posted on my YouTube page, and you can always listen back to it. Deborah says, anyone born in fall 1971 has Jupiter in Scorpio and Mars in Aquarius, conjunct North Node in Aquarius. Big month for me. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, those you'll have those activated by these. You have for a while we've had eclipses in Leo and Aquarius for a while now. I don't have any Aquarius planets. Might I be able to take it easy? Well, it depends on your chart. Some of us will experience eclipses in a more peripheral manner, things happening to people that we're close to or in our lives or in the environments we're in. We may not experience it in a directly personal manner. It sort of depends on your chart. But I think that these eclipses, especially in July, are so powerful with the opposition to Pluto and the conjunction to Mars retrograde that they're going to affect us because they're probably going to be related to big events, like I said, at least happening around us. So, right. Well, we clocked in at a little under an hour, which is good. So I'm going to end it here, and we will continue. Obviously, when the eclipses roll through, I'll do some videos on the individual eclipses to sort of refresh. But I hope that this was interesting for everybody and gives you some sense of where, what's coming downstream. The point of doing all of this is so that we might be prepared to not lose ourselves in these forces. So some heads up about where things are going helps us not to get lost in them. And it also prepares us to accept and study and reflect on the events of destiny that may come up with these transits. And by doing so, we can keep the light on upstairs, keep the light on in the heart. When we have to do that if we want to continue cultivating spiritual happiness in our lives. So that's why we do this. All right, everyone, you have a great day. Take care. Bye.